Welcome back to another journey through the haunted corridors of Five Nights at Freddy's. Tonight, we're settling in to explore perhaps the most heartbreaking and profound story in the entire franchise. A tale of a father's desperate love, a daughter's tragic end, and the birth of a guardian spirit who would watch over the lost and the damned for decades to come. This is the complete story of Charlotte Emily and the Puppet, a narrative that threads through every corner of Scott Cawthon's horrifying universe, touching every game, every timeline, every soul trapped within metal and wire. Before we begin our descent into this particular thread of the Fazbear Entertainment tapestry, I want to invite you to get comfortable. Whether you're actively listening as these details wash over you, letting the story accompany you into sleep, or simply absorbing the lore while you work or relax, this narrative will carry you through one of the most emotionally resonant arcs in all of gaming. We'll trace Charlotte's path from a living, breathing child with hopes and dreams to the supernatural entity that would shape the fates of countless souls trapped in animatronic shells. We'll examine the technology her father created to protect her, the rain-soaked night that saw his worst fears realized, and the decades that followed as Charlotte's spirit worked tirelessly from within her mechanical prison to give other victims what she herself could never have: peace, companionship, and ultimately, freedom. The puppet stands apart from every other animatronic in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. While Freddy Fazbear might be the mascot, the face of the franchise that appears on every piece of merchandise, and while Springtrap embodies the twisted evil of William Afton himself, the puppet represents something altogether different. This slender black and white figure with its painted mask-like face and hollow eyes serves as the series' moral center, the keeper of souls, the bridge between the living world and the realm of vengeful spirits. Understanding Charlotte Emily and the puppet means understanding the beating heart of what Five Nights at Freddy's truly is beneath all the jump scares and animatronic horror. This isn't just a story about killer robots and survival horror gameplay. It's about children who deserved so much better than what they received. It's about a father's crushing guilt and decades of grief. It's about the lengths love will drive someone to go, even beyond death itself, even when transformed into something that shouldn't be able to love at all. Throughout this exploration, we'll move chronologically through Charlotte's existence, from her life as Henry Emily's beloved daughter, through her brutal transformation into the puppet, her crucial role in the missing children incident, her appearances across multiple games in the franchise, and ultimately to her final rest in flames and freedom. We'll examine the security puppet minigame frame by frame, understanding every detail of that rainy night. We'll dissect the give gifts, give life sequence, and what it reveals about Charlotte's supernatural abilities and her driving purpose. We'll walk through the Happiest Day celebration, that bittersweet moment of transcendence that Charlotte orchestrated for the children she protected. We'll understand why Lefty exists at all, what that animatronic represents, and the ethical questions surrounding Henry Emily's final plan. Each piece of this puzzle reveals layers of tragedy, determination, and the one constant that defines Charlotte Emily across every iteration: her fundamental need to protect others, to lift them up, to ensure that no child faces their darkness alone. So settle in as the music box begins to wind down, as purple tears streak down a painted face, as we enter the prize corner where a long, slender figure waits in its box. This is the complete lore of the puppet and Charlotte Emily, and by the time we reach the end, you'll understand why this character resonates so deeply with fans, why her story matters, and why even in a franchise filled with horror, Charlotte Emily represents something transcendent: hope, purpose, and love that refuses to die. The girl behind the mask. Charlotte Emily existed before she became the puppet. This seems obvious to state, but it's crucial to remember because her humanity often gets lost beneath layers of animatronic horror and supernatural possession. Charlie, as she was likely known to those close to her, was a real girl with a real life, real hopes, real fears, real dreams about her future. Though we catch only glimpses of who she was through the fragmented storytelling that defines Five Nights at Freddy's lore, what we can piece together paints a portrait of exceptional kindness and selflessness that would define her existence both in life and far beyond death. What we know about Charlotte comes primarily from several sources. Henry Emily's own words in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator provide the most direct insight. From the behavior patterns we observe in the puppet across multiple games, we can infer characteristics about the spirit driving it. And by connecting dots across games, minigames, and timelines, we can understand the person beneath the mask, the child whose personality would shape how she used her cursed supernatural existence. Henry Emily himself describes his daughter in terms that paint a clear portrait. He speaks of her selfless nature, her nobility of spirit, the way she constantly put others before herself, even as a young child. These weren't just the rose-tinted memories of a grieving father looking back on his lost daughter through decades of pain. Henry's description is borne out by everything we see Charlotte do after her death. Her actions as the puppet, her role in helping the missing children, her organization of the happiest day, all of these stem from personality traits she possessed in life, characteristics that were so fundamental to who she was that not even death could erase them. Charlie was the kind of child who noticed when others were hurting. She was the kind of person who stepped forward when help was needed, who saw children in danger and felt compelled to act even at great personal risk. We see this later in how she responds to the missing children incident, but that protective instinct had to come from somewhere. It was part of who she was as a living person. Some children are naturally empathetic, naturally inclined to help and protect. Charlotte was one of these children, and in the cruelest irony imaginable, this very trait, this beautiful, selfless part of her nature, would define her existence as a supernatural entity, trapped in an animatronic shell. Given Henry's role as co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment alongside William Afton, Charlotte would have been intimately familiar with locations like Freddy Fazbear's Pizza or Fredbear's Family Diner. As the daughter of one of the company's creators, one of the engineering geniuses who made the animatronic performers possible, she likely had access beyond what typical children experienced. This suggests she may have watched her father work on the animatronic performers, seen the engineering behind their movements and songs, understood them as machines with servos and endoskeletons, rather than mysterious magical beings, rather than breeding contempt or boredom, as familiarity sometimes does. This behind-the-scenes knowledge could have deepened Charlotte's appreciation for the joy these establishments brought to other children. She could witness firsthand how her father's creations made people happy, how children's faces lit up when Freddy and his band performed, how birthday parties at these locations created memories that would last lifetimes. For Charlotte, these weren't just restaurants. They were places where her father's genius translated into tangible happiness for others, and for a child with her selfless nature, that would have been something special to witness. Her relationship with Henry was clearly extraordinarily close. You don't engineer an entire security system around protecting one specific child unless that bond runs deeper than the ocean. The security puppet, which we'll explore in extensive detail shortly, represents Henry's love made manifest in circuits and servos. He knew his daughter would be at these restaurants frequently. He knew the potential dangers that existed in any public space, and he wanted to ensure her safety with the same meticulous attention to detail he brought to every engineering challenge he faced. The green bracelet Charlotte wore wasn't just a party favor or a piece of identification. It was a technological lifeline, an umbilical cord connecting her to a machine programmed with a single purpose: watch over Charlotte Emily, keep her from leaving the building unsupervised, prevent her from reaching any exit that might lead to danger lurking outside. The bracelet broadcast her location constantly, and the security puppet listened, always listening, always ready to activate if that signal moved toward danger. Charlotte's age at the time of her death remains somewhat ambiguous in the games themselves, though she's consistently portrayed as young, probably somewhere between 6 and 10 years old. Old enough to have developed that selfless personality Henry remembered so fondly. Old enough to understand the world around her and make choices about how to treat others. Young enough to still attend children's birthday parties at pizza restaurants. Young enough that being locked outside in the rain would be genuinely frightening. A moment of vulnerability that would quickly turn to terror. She had dark hair, often depicted in pigtails in various minigame sprites and official artwork. She wore that distinctive green security bracelet that would ultimately fail to save her life. In the security puppet minigame, we see her as a small sprite standing outside the building, a tiny figure in the rain, jumping up and down repeatedly, desperately trying to get someone's attention, trying to get back inside where it was safe and warm and dry, where the adults who were supposed to protect her could see her and help her. The novel trilogy, The Silver Eyes, The Twisted Ones, and The Fourth Closet, expands on Charlotte's character significantly, though we must always remember those books represent an alternate continuity, a different version of events that parallels but doesn't directly connect to the game timeline. Still, the core traits remain consistent across versions, suggesting these characteristics are fundamental to who Charlotte is, regardless of continuity. Book Charlotte is mechanically gifted like her father, curious about how things work, loyal to her friends to a fault, haunted by loss and trauma, determined to uncover truth no matter how painful that truth might be. These characteristics align perfectly with what we see in the games. The Charlotte who possesses the puppet shows mechanical understanding in how she helps spirits inhabit animatronic bodies. She knows how these machines work because she learned from her father. She demonstrates unwavering loyalty to the other murdered children, refusing to abandon them even when she might have moved on to rest. She's driven by a need to set things right, to ensure justice is served and peace is granted, even if she must orchestrate these outcomes herself across decades of patient effort. What makes Charlotte's character particularly poignant is the stark contrast between her fundamental nature and her ultimate fate. She was all about protecting others, about selflessness and care and putting the needs of others before her own. William Afton chose to murder a child whose defining characteristic was her kindness. He took someone who lifted others up and silenced her voice forever. He murdered innocence itself, snuffed out a light that made the world around it brighter. But in doing so, in making Charlotte his first victim, Afton inadvertently created the one force that would undermine all his plans. Charlotte's protective instincts didn't die with her body that rainy night. They intensified, focused, crystallized into the driving purpose of her spectral existence. She would ensure no other child suffered alone the way she did. She would give them gifts, give them life, give them companionship in death, and eventually give them a happiest day. William Afton, in his cruelty and his arrogance, created his own most persistent opposition when he murdered Henry Emily's daughter. Charlotte lived in a world adjacent to animatronic entertainment, but not consumed by it. Like any child, she would have had normal concerns, normal fears, normal joys that had nothing to do with her father's work. It's reasonable to imagine she had favorite foods and television shows, friends at school who knew nothing about Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, toys she loved, dreams about what she wanted to be when she grew up. All of that was stolen from her on one rain-soaked night when circumstances aligned in the worst possible way. When children bullied her by locking her outside, when the security puppet was trapped and unable to reach her in time. When William Afton was prowling the area in one of his darkest moods, and Charlotte, given what we know of her selfless nature, likely tried to handle the situation herself, likely tried not to bother anyone, likely tried to be brave even though she was frightened and cold and wet and desperate to get back inside. She stood in that rain, jumping, waving, trying to be seen, not knowing that something far worse than being locked out was approaching her from the shadows. Understanding who Charlotte was as a person reframes everything about the puppet. This isn't just a creepy animatronic that crawls out of a music box to jump scare players. This is a child who loved and was loved, who died terrified and alone, who found herself bound to an animatronic body and consciously chose, to use that cursed existence to protect others. When we wind the music box in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, we're not just keeping a malfunctioning robot at bay. We're calming the spirit of a murdered child who has spent decades watching over other victims, who activates with protective fury when she senses potential danger to children. When we see the puppet's painted tears, those distinctive purple streaks running down its white face, we're looking at grief made visible, at sorrow that transcends death, at trauma that left permanent marks on the vessel that houses Charlotte's soul. Charlotte Emily deserves to be remembered as more than just another ghost in the machine, more than just a lore data point or a gameplay mechanic. She was a person first, a daughter, possibly a sister to Sammy in some continuities, a child who embodied the best of what humanity could be. To understand her story, to really understand what happens to her and what she becomes, we must first acknowledge her humanity, her personhood, the life that was taken from her far too soon. Henry Emily, the father who built protection and failed to understand Charlotte. Emily's story in its full tragic scope, we must first understand her father, Henry Emily. He stands as one of the most important figures in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's mythology, yet he remains largely in the background until the very end of the timeline, working from the shadows while others take center stage. Unlike William Afton, who commands attention through multiple games, as both Springtrap and the malevolent force behind countless murders, Henry works quietly, methodically, driven by grief and responsibility that spans decades. He's the engineer, the creator, the co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment, whose genius made the animatronic performers possible in the first place. More importantly for our story tonight, he's a father whose love for his daughter drove him to create unprecedented safety measures, whose grief over her loss consumed decades of his life, and whose final plan would free not just Charlotte, but all the trapped souls suffering in animatronic prisons throughout the Fazbear Entertainment locations. Henry Emily and William Afton founded Fazbear Entertainment together, likely sometime in the 1970s, two men with complementary skills and a shared vision. These partners represented different aspects of innovation and showmanship. Henry was the mechanical genius, the engineer who could make metal sing and dance, who understood robotics and programming at a level that allowed him to create machines that seemed almost alive. He designed the spring-lock suits that allowed performers to wear animatronic shells, creating a hybrid between costume and robot. He created the main cast of characters that would become iconic: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy. He understood the marriage of form and function that makes an animatronic performer work, that creates the illusion of life through careful engineering. Henry built wonders. He made children smile through the magic of his mechanical puppets. But Henry's engineering skills extended beyond mere entertainment. He thought in terms of systems, of problems and solutions, of identifying potential dangers and neutralizing them through clever design. This mindset would eventually lead him to create the security puppet, a machine designed with one singular purpose: keep children safe. Henry looked at his restaurants, saw potential threats, saw how easy it would be for a child to wander outside unsupervised or be taken by a stranger, and he engineered a solution. The security puppet represented preventive security made manifest in animatronic form. It wasn't meant to entertain. It wasn't programmed to sing songs or host birthday parties. It was meant to protect, to monitor, to intervene. It was love translated into technology, a father's fear transformed into circuits and servos. We can imagine Henry's personality through his creations and his eventual actions. He was meticulous, thoughtful, someone who considered consequences and planned for contingencies. When he finally speaks directly to us in Pizzeria Simulator, his voice carries tremendous weight and weariness. This is someone who has thought deeply about responsibility, about guilt, about the unintended consequences of creation. Henry knew he helped build the venues where children died. He provided William Afton with the tools and locations that enabled his murders. The restaurants that were supposed to bring joy became hunting grounds for a serial killer, and Henry carried that knowledge like a stone around his neck. His relationship with William Afton is tragic in its own right, a betrayal that cuts deeper than we can fully comprehend. These were business partners, colleagues, possibly even friends. They shared a vision of family entertainment, of bringing mechanical marvels to life for children's delight. They built something together, created a brand that would have been legendary even without the tragedies that followed. Henry couldn't have known what William truly was. How could anyone predict that their colleague, their partner, the person they worked alongside day after day, harbored such profound darkness? When Henry learned the truth, when he discovered that William had murdered his daughter Charlotte, along with at least 5 other children, the betrayal must have been absolutely devastating. Not just the personal loss of Charlotte, though that alone would be unbearable, but the realization that he'd worked alongside a monster for years, that his creations had been twisted to serve evil purposes, that his life's work had become a vehicle for tragedy. Everything Henry built was corrupted by William's actions, and there was no way to separate the joy his animatronics brought from the horror they'd been used to facilitate. The security puppet represents Henry's philosophy and approach to problems perfectly. He didn't just identify a problem, children potentially leaving the building unsupervised. He created an elegant, systematic solution. Each child attending birthday parties would receive a security bracelet, color-coded to a specific monitoring animatronic. Charlotte's was green, matching the security puppet's glowing eyes, establishing a clear visual and technological link between protected child and mechanical protector. If a child wearing their bracelet approached an exit, The security puppet would activate immediately, would move to intercept them, would keep them safe inside the building where parents and staff could watch over them. It was brilliant in its simplicity, proactive rather than reactive, automated protection that didn't require constant human vigilance. In theory, it was foolproof. The technology would never get distracted, never look away at the wrong moment, never fail to notice a child in danger. Henry likely tested this system extensively before implementing it. He would have run scenarios, checked for failure points, ensured the security puppet could reliably track its assigned child through the restaurant environment. What he couldn't account for, what no amount of testing could predict, was malicious interference. The security puppet worked exactly as designed. When Charlotte was locked outside, the animatronic registered her absence immediately, fought desperately to escape its box to reach her, followed her outside even through the rain that damaged its circuits. The system did everything it was supposed to do. It performed flawlessly. It just wasn't enough. Sometimes even perfect engineering can't prevent tragedy when human cruelty enters the equation. The security puppet didn't fail due to any design flaw or programming error. It failed because someone, whether the bullying children or another malicious party, deliberately sabotaged it, trapping it in its box when Charlotte needed it most. And it failed because by the time it broke free and reached Charlotte's location, William Afton had already struck, had already committed the murder that would haunt Henry for the rest of his life. After Charlotte's death, Henry seems to have withdrawn from active involvement with Fazbear Entertainment. The exact timeline is murky, as FNAF timelines tend to be, but William Afton continued operating the restaurants, continued his murders, continued everything while Henry dealt with grief that would have crushed most people. For decades, literal decades, Henry carried the weight of his daughter's death. He couldn't save her that night despite all his engineering genius. He couldn't even give her proper rest because her spirit had become trapped in the very machine he'd built to protect her. The security puppet, his creation, his gift of protection to his daughter, had become her prison. The irony must have been agonizing. Henry built that animatronic out of love, programmed it to keep Charlotte safe, and in death it became the vessel that trapped her spirit in the world, unable to move on, unable to rest, forced to exist in a liminal state between life and death for decades. Eventually, Henry realized what had happened. He discovered that Charlotte possessed the puppet. He learned about the other children's souls trapped in animatronics throughout the various Fazbear Entertainment locations. He understood that William was responsible for all of it, that his old partner had become a serial killer who murdered children and used the animatronics, Henry's creations, as tools for his crimes. And he understood that the possessions were creating an endless cycle of violence and suffering that would never end without intervention. At some point, Henry decided that ending this cycle mattered more than his own life, more than his desire to live and remember Charlotte. He couldn't let Charlotte and the others remain trapped forever. He couldn't allow William to continue existing even in his undead Springtrap state, even burned and broken, still persisting through sheer malevolence. So Henry began planning, drawing on decades of engineering expertise to create a solution as elegant and systematic as the security puppet had been. The creation of Lefty, which we'll explore in extensive detail later in this journey, showed that Henry's engineering skills remained sharp even after decades away from active work. He designed a bear animatronic specifically to capture and contain the puppet, to bring his daughter to one final location where he could free her through the only method that seemed to work on possessed animatronics: fire. The acronym Lefty, lure, encapsulate, fuse, transport, and extract, reveals the systematic thinking that defined Henry throughout his life. Each step had a specific purpose, each mechanism served a function, all working toward the ultimate goal of gathering the possessed animatronics for a final resolution. Henry didn't do anything halfway. When he committed to a plan, he thought through every detail, anticipated every complication, engineered solutions to problems before they arose. Pizzeria Simulator represents Henry's masterpiece of planning, decades of preparation coming to fruition. He created a fake restaurant franchise opportunity, lured Michael Afton to manage it, designed an elaborate labyrinth underneath the pizzeria, and ensured every possessed animatronic would be drawn to the location. He even recorded messages guiding Michael through salvaging the animatronics, knowing this would bring them all together in one place, where they could be dealt with permanently. When everything was finally in place, when all the pieces were on the board exactly where Henry needed them, he set the building ablaze. He burned it all, the animatronics, the restaurant, himself included, because he knew this was the only way to free the souls trapped inside metal shells, to finally give Charlotte and the others the peace they'd been denied for so long. Henry's final act was one of sacrifice, ensuring his daughter could finally rest, while taking responsibility for his role in creating the circumstances that led to her death and the deaths of so many others. In his final speech, delivered as the flames begin to rise, Henry addresses each animatronic individually. When he speaks to Charlotte, his words carry profound sorrow and love that spans decades. He apologizes for not being able to save her on the day she died, acknowledging the failure that has haunted him every day since. He explains that this time he will succeed in saving her, not by preventing her death. That moment has long passed, but by letting her go, by releasing her from the puppet's prison through destruction and flame. I'm sorry that on that day, the day you were shut out and left to die, no one was there to lift you up into their arms the way you lifted others into yours, Henry says, his voice heavy with decades of grief. These words encapsulate everything about Henry's relationship with Charlotte, his failure to protect her, his recognition of her selfless nature, his determination to finally do right by her even if it means his own death. Henry Emily's entire arc, from brilliant creator to grieving father to determined executioner of a decades-long plan, stems from his love for Charlotte. Everything he did in the end, he did for her. He engineered her freedom the way he once engineered her protection, with meticulous care and absolute resolve. Henry represents the human heart of the Five Nights at Freddy's story. Where William Afton embodies cruelty and obsession, Henry embodies love and responsibility taken to their logical extremes. He made mistakes. He helped create the venues where tragedies occurred. He partnered with a monster without recognizing what William truly was. But he never stopped trying to fix those mistakes, never stopped working toward making things right, even when it cost him everything: his livelihood, his peace of mind, and ultimately his life. His final act was ensuring his daughter could finally rest, taking on the responsibility of ending the cycle of violence his creations had been used to perpetuate. Understanding Henry helps us understand why Charlotte acts as she does within the puppet. She inherited her father's protective instincts, his desire to keep children safe, his willingness to sacrifice himself for others. Like father, like daughter, both dedicated their existence to ensuring no one else would suffer as they had suffered. Henry gave Charlotte the security puppet to keep her safe. In death, Charlotte became the security for all the other lost children, keeping them together, helping them find purpose and eventually peace, ensuring they weren't alone in the darkness. The relationship between Henry and Charlotte, between father and daughter, between creator and creation, between the security puppet and the puppet it became, forms the emotional foundation of Five Nights at Freddy's. Their story transcends horror, becoming something more profound, a meditation on love, loss, responsibility, and the desperate lengths people will go to protect those they care about, even when protection comes decades too late. The security puppet. Technology born from love. The security puppet stands as one of the most fascinating and tragic pieces of technology in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's universe. Unlike the entertainment-focused animatronics that sing and dance for children's parties, unlike Freddy and Bonnie and Chica, who were built to bring joy through performance, the security puppet served a singular, vital purpose, protecting children from leaving the building unsupervised, keeping them safe from dangers that might lurk outside the controlled environment of the restaurant. To fully understand Charlotte Emily's story and her transformation into the puppet, we must understand this machine in exhaustive detail, how it worked, why Henry created it, what made it unique among animatronics, and ultimately why it failed on the one night that mattered most, the night that would change everything. Let's start with the physical design, because even in its original form before Charlotte's possession, the security puppet was distinctive. In the pizzeria simulator minigame that reveals Charlotte's death, we see the security puppet before it became the haunted entity we encounter in later games. It shares many characteristics with the standard puppet that players face in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, but with crucial differences that reveal its original security function and distinguish it from what it would later become. The security puppet had a similar tall, slender build to the later puppet, that same basic body structure reminiscent of a marionette-style animatronic, with elongated limbs and a thin torso that made it immediately visually distinct from the bulkier animal-themed performers. However, this early version lacks the distinctive purple tear streaks that would come to define the puppet's appearance in every subsequent appearance. Those tears aren't original to the design. They're not something Henry painted on or programmed into the visual display. They appeared after Charlotte's possession, a visual manifestation of her sorrow made permanent on the animatronic's face. Grief rendered visible in purple streaks that would never fade. The security puppet wore what appears to be a jester's hat or cap in early depictions, giving it a slightly different aesthetic from the bare-headed puppet of later games. Its face still featured that white mask with painted features, the rosy cheeks suggesting innocence, the lipstick smile frozen in a permanent expression of friendliness. But the security puppet's eyes, those hollow spaces that would later sometimes show white pinpricks of light when the puppet was active, glowed bright green in its original form. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice made because green looks nice or stands out visually. The green glow served as a functional visual indicator that the animatronic was linked to the green security bracelet system, creating a clear, obvious connection between the child being monitored and the machine doing the monitoring. Anyone looking at the security puppet's glowing green eyes would immediately understand its purpose, its connection to Charlotte and her green bracelet. The security bracelet system Henry designed was elegantly simple in concept, which is often the mark of truly brilliant engineering. Children attending birthday parties at the pizzeria would receive colored wristbands, likely presented as standard party favors that kids would be excited to wear. But these bands doubled as sophisticated safety measures. Charlotte's bracelet was green, matching the security puppet's eye color and establishing the technological and visual link between child and protector. The bracelet would contain some form of RFID chip or similar tracking technology. The specifics aren't detailed in the games, but the function is clear. It constantly broadcast its location to the security puppet, a steady signal that said, "I am here, I am safe." As long as Charlotte remained inside the building, as long as that bracelet signal registered as being within the designated safe zone, the security puppet could remain dormant in its box. There was no need for intervention. The child was where she should be, surrounded by people, visible to staff and parents, safe. But if the bracelet approached an exit, if that signal began moving toward the boundary of the safe zone or, heaven forbid, left the premises entirely, the security puppet would activate immediately. The instructions displayed during the security puppet minigame spell out its prime directive with perfect clarity. Do not let your assigned child reach the exit. This single rule governed the animatronic's entire existence. It didn't need to entertain or interact with children in other ways. It didn't need to sing songs or tell jokes or hand out prizes. It had one job, one purpose, one reason for existing. Keep the child with the matching bracelet inside where they would be safe. We can imagine the security puppet stationed somewhere near the prize corner even back then, positioned optimally to intercept any child trying to leave through the front doors or any other exit. Its gift box housing served as both storage and a launching point, keeping the animatronic out of sight during normal operations, while ensuring it could deploy quickly when needed. The box wasn't just decorative, it was functional. A containment system that allowed the security puppet to wait patiently until its sensors detected a problem. The technology involved would have been fairly advanced for its time, likely the late 1970s or early 1980s when this system was first implemented. Henry had to solve several significant engineering challenges to make this work. The animatronic needed reliable sensors to track the bracelet signal through the restaurant environment, dealing with interference from other electronic devices and the metal structures of the building itself. It required sophisticated mobility systems, allowing it to move quickly when activated, to navigate through crowds of children and adults without causing harm, to reach exits before a child could pass through them. It needed complex programming to navigate the restaurant layout, avoid obstacles both static and moving, calculate optimal intercept paths in real time. Most importantly, it needed fail-safes to ensure it wouldn't harm the very children it was designed to protect. An animatronic moving quickly through a crowded restaurant represented a potential hazard itself. Henry had to ensure the security puppet could fulfill its protective function without creating new dangers in the process. Henry built all of this into one slender animatronic, creating a guardian that could operate independently without requiring constant human oversight. It was a remarkable achievement of engineering, a system that should have made Charlotte one of the safest children in any public space in the country. And in normal circumstances, it would have worked exactly as intended. The security puppet's programming likely included multiple layers of protocols and responses. At the most basic level, it monitored the bracelet's position constantly, processing location data in real time. When the signal moved toward an exit, proximity alarms would trigger, activating the animatronic from its dormant state. It would exit its box rapidly, calculate the fastest path to intercept the child based on current positions and movement vectors, and position itself between the child and the door. Upon reaching the child, it would probably use gentle restraint, perhaps extending its arms to block the child's path, perhaps simply using its presence to discourage further movement toward the exit, while simultaneously alerting staff to the situation through some form of alarm system. The child would be kept safe. Parents would be notified that their child had attempted to leave, and crisis would be averted before any real danger could occur. We see this programming execute in the security puppet minigame, but under nightmare conditions that Henry never anticipated. 3 children, depicted in the minigame with those unsettling smiling faces that feel almost mocking given what's happening, have locked Charlotte outside the building during a rainstorm. This represents a failure scenario Henry couldn't have fully anticipated when designing the system. His engineering was focused on preventing children from leaving, but what if other children deliberately forced someone out? What if the security puppet itself was sabotaged or blocked from responding? In the minigame, we see the security puppet trapped in its box, with another gift box placed on top, preventing it from opening. This is absolutely crucial to understanding what went wrong that night. Someone, whether the bullying children or another malicious party, intentionally disabled the security system. They knew about the security puppet, understood it would activate if Charlotte was outside, and took deliberate steps to prevent that activation. This wasn't just thoughtless bullying by children who didn't understand consequences. This was calculated sabotage of a safety system, creating the exact vulnerability that allowed William Afton to strike. The security puppet struggles desperately against this obstruction. In the minigame, we can see the gift box shaking violently, the animatronic fighting against its containment, trying with every servo and circuit to fulfill its programming, to reach Charlotte, who is now outside in the rain, alone and increasingly distressed. The programming is screaming at it to move, to protect, to intervene, but the physical obstruction prevents it from acting on those commands. Eventually, the security puppet breaks free. It escapes its containment through sheer mechanical force and immediately begins moving towards Charlotte's location, following the signal from her green bracelet. The programming is executing exactly as designed. Everything is working correctly. The security puppet is doing everything it was built to do, responding appropriately to the emergency situation. But by the time it reaches the exit, by the time it makes its way outside into the rain, Charlotte has already faded away. The minigame shows her sprite becoming increasingly dim, her small figure jumping up and down repeatedly, trying desperately to get someone's attention inside the building. Can someone see me? Can someone help me? I'm stuck out here and it's raining and I'm scared and I want to come back inside where it's warm and safe. Then she disappears entirely from the screen, leaving only the rain falling in the alley. Charlotte's presence erased from the world. William Afton has already found her, already murdered her, already left her small body discarded near the trash cans behind the building like she was garbage, something to be disposed of and forgotten. The security puppet emerges into the rain seconds too late to prevent the very tragedy it was explicitly designed to prevent. But what happens next defines everything about the puppet as we know it across the rest of the franchise. The security puppet, still following the last known location of Charlotte's bracelet signal, ventures out into the rain despite conditions it was never designed to handle. Its programming won't let it stop. Charlotte is outside. Charlotte is in danger. The directive is absolute. Reach Charlotte, protect Charlotte, keep Charlotte safe. The animatronic moves through the alley, searching, its circuits already taking severe damage from the rain. Water and electronics don't mix. This is basic physics, basic engineering reality. We can see in the minigame, that the security puppet begins to deteriorate as it moves through the rain. Its movements become erratic and jerky. Sparks fly from its joints. The visual representation makes clear that the rain is killing it, short-circuiting the delicate electronics that allow it to function, destroying the very systems that might have saved Charlotte if they'd activated just minutes earlier. The security puppet finds Charlotte's body in the alley. The bracelet is still on her wrist, still faithfully transmitting its signal. But the child wearing it is gone, murdered, her life stolen. The security puppet crawls to her corpse, its systems failing catastrophically, water damage overwhelming every circuit. In a moment that carries immense weight and will echo through decades of FNAF lore, the animatronic comes to rest beside Charlotte's body, embracing it in a futile protective gesture that comes far too late to matter. The security puppet, Henry Emily's gift of protection to his beloved daughter, dies next to the child it failed to save. This is the moment of possession, though we don't realize it immediately. As the security puppet systems shut down one by one, as its programming reaches its tragic conclusion unable to fulfill its core directive, Charlotte's spirit finds a vessel. The rain that destroyed the animatronic also created the perfect conditions for her soul to inhabit it, moisture facilitating some supernatural connection we don't fully understand. The security puppet's final act, embracing Charlotte's body in death, formed the connection that would bind her spirit to this machine forever. When the security puppet next activates, it won't be Henry's programming driving it. It will be Charlotte Emily, trapped in an animatronic body, beginning an existence that would span decades and touch countless lives. The security system meant to protect her became her prison. But Charlotte, being who she was, being defined by that selfless protective instinct, would transform that prison into something else. She would become the protector the security puppet was meant to be, but for all children instead of just herself, for decades instead of just one night. The security puppet's failure wasn't a flaw in its design or programming. Henry built a remarkably effective system that should have worked under any normal circumstances, but he couldn't account for deliberate sabotage by bullying children who knew exactly how to disable it. He couldn't account for the rain that would damage the animatronic circuits as it pursued its duty. Most of all, he couldn't account for William Afton, his business partner, his colleague, perhaps his friend, being a child murderer who had been watching and waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. The security puppet did everything right. It broke free from sabotage. It followed Charlotte's signal. It found her body. It tried to protect her even as its systems failed catastrophically. Henry's creation worked as designed. The world around it had simply become too cruel, too deliberately evil for any machine to fully protect against. The transformation of the security puppet into the puppet we encounter in the games marks a fundamental shift from technology to something supernatural, from programmed responses to conscious choice, from mechanical guardian to spiritual protector. After Charlotte's possession, the animatronic gained capabilities Henry never programmed, abilities that transcend its original design specifications. It could move with supernatural swiftness that shouldn't be possible given its mechanical structure. It could ignore many physical limitations, phasing through certain barriers, or appearing in locations it had no conventional means of reaching. Most significantly, it developed the ability to interact with other spirits, to help them possess animatronic bodies, to organize and coordinate them toward common goals. The music box that would later control the puppet in Five Nights at Freddy's 2 likely served as a containment measure implemented after staff realized this animatronic was behaving erratically, moving when it shouldn't, appearing in places it had no reason to be. Someone at Fazbear Entertainment figured out that playing music, specifically calming, lullaby-like music, kept the puppet docile, kept it contained in its box in the prize corner. Whether they understood they were dealing with a possessed animatronic or simply thought they had a malfunctioning machine, the music box solution worked, creating the gameplay mechanic that would define the puppet's presence in FNAF 2. The security puppet represents the intersection of Henry's love, his engineering genius, and the cruel reality that sometimes love and genius aren't enough to protect those we care about. It stands as a monument to good intentions that failed, to protection that arrived seconds too late, to technology that worked perfectly except when it mattered most. Every time we encounter the puppet in later games, whether winding the music box in FNAF 2 or discovering it contained within Lefty in Pizzeria Simulator, we're looking at the ghost of the security system, at Charlotte Emily bound forever to the very machine her father built to keep her safe. The gift box that contains her, the music that soothes her, the prize corner where she waits. All of these echo back to that rainy night when a security animatronic made one final desperate attempt to fulfill its programming and failed, creating the conditions for a guardian spirit that would watch over lost children for decades to come. The security puppet's failure created the puppet's purpose, transforming Henry's technological solution into Charlotte's spiritual mission. The night everything changed, the night Charlotte Emily died, represents the moment when the entire Five Nights at Freddy's timeline truly began its descent into sustained multi-generational darkness. Before this tragedy, before this specific rainy night, Fazbear Entertainment was simply a family restaurant chain with innovative entertainment technology, a place where children celebrated birthdays and families made happy memories. After Charlotte's death, after that rain-soaked evening when a daughter was murdered and a father's worst fears were realized in the cruelest way imaginable, everything changed irreversibly. This moment marks William Afton's first murder in the game timeline, the beginning of the missing children incidents chain of horrors. It represents the creation of the first possessed animatronic, establishing mechanics and rules that would govern how spirits interact with machines throughout the franchise. It's the opening of wounds that wouldn't heal for decades, trauma that would echo through time, affecting not just Charlotte and Henry, but countless other lives. Understanding exactly what happened that night requires piecing together fragments from multiple minigames, examining timeline placements, considering narrative hints scattered across several games. The setting was likely Fredbear's family diner, the original location that predated the later Freddy Fazbear's pizza establishments, or possibly an early Freddy's location during the transition period. The connection to the security puppet, which doesn't appear at later venues except as the possessed puppet, indicates this occurred at whatever establishment first implemented Henry's security bracelet system. The timing sits somewhere in the early 1980s, certainly before 1983's bite that killed the crying child, and it's established through multiple sources as William Afton's initial murder that would spiral into a serial killing spree spanning years. This is important. Charlotte was first. Her death wasn't just another tragedy in a series of tragedies. It was the inciting incident, the moment that proved to William Afton that he could murder children and get away with it, the success that would embolden him to continue killing. Charlotte arrived at the restaurant that day expecting normalcy, expecting just another day at a location that would have felt like a second home to her. Perhaps there was a birthday party happening, some other child's celebration. Maybe it was just a regular visit. Charlotte spending time at the place her father had built, surrounded by the animatronics she'd watched him create. She wore her green security bracelet, that technological umbilical cord connecting her to the security puppet that was programmed specifically to keep her safe from any danger. Everything should have been fine. She was in her father's restaurant, surrounded by people, protected by a security system designed by an engineering genius specifically to prevent exactly what was about to happen. She was probably safer there than anywhere else in the world, at least in theory. What could possibly go wrong in such a controlled environment? The trouble began with other children. 3 kids depicted in the security puppet minigame with those unsettling, smiling faces that contrast so sharply with Charlotte's crying expression. We don't know their specific identities or their exact motivations. The game doesn't provide that level of detail. Maybe they were bullying Charlotte out of jealousy. After all, she was the owner's daughter, probably received special treatment. Maybe got into the restaurant free while they had to pay. Maybe they thought it would be funny, just a harmless prank that got out of hand. Maybe they were mean-spirited children who enjoyed making others suffer. Maybe they simply didn't understand the potential consequences of their actions. Operating with that thoughtless cruelty children are sometimes capable of, especially in groups where individual empathy gets drowned out by mob mentality and the desire to impress peers. These 3 kids did something that would have catastrophic, irreversible results that would echo through decades. They locked Charlotte outside. Think carefully about what this required, what it means. They had to get Charlotte near an exit first, probably the main doors at the front of the restaurant. They had to somehow push her outside or lure her outside into the rain. And it was raining, pouring, not just a light drizzle, but the kind of rain that creates that grey curtain effect in the minigame. Rain heavy enough to damage electronics. Then they had to close the doors and lock or block them somehow, preventing Charlotte from getting back inside. And critically, someone, we don't know if it was these children or another party, but someone, also sabotaged the security puppet. They placed a second gift box on top of the animatronic's housing, trapping it inside, preventing it from opening and activating when Charlotte's bracelet moved outside the building's safe zone. This level of interference suggests knowledge of the security system that seems beyond what random children would possess. The bullying wasn't just spontaneous meanness. It involved deliberately disabling the one thing designed specifically to keep Charlotte safe. Did the bullying children know about the security puppet? Did they understand they were sabotaging a safety system? Or was there another party involved? Someone who wanted Charlotte vulnerable? Someone who created the opportunity for what came next? Charlotte stood outside in the rain, a small figure pressing against windows or doors, trying desperately to get someone's attention. The security puppet minigame shows her jumping up and down repeatedly. That universal gesture of a child seeking notice. Look at me, see me. I'm here and I need help. Can someone see me? Can someone help me? I'm stuck out here and it's raining and I'm scared and I want to come back inside where it's warm and safe and dry. Inside the restaurant, life continued normally. Music played from the animatronic band. Children laughed and played. Adults chatted and ate pizza. The celebration or regular business continued, everyone oblivious to the small girl locked outside, or if they noticed, not acting quickly enough to matter. Maybe they thought she was supposed to be outside. Maybe they didn't see her through the rain. Maybe they just didn't care enough to check on a crying child. Meanwhile, William Afton was in the area. We see his purple car in the Take Cake to the Children minigame, which is closely connected to this event in the timeline. Whether he'd been at the restaurant all along, working alongside Henry, or checking on the business, or whether he arrived during this crisis, remains deliberately unclear. What we know with absolute certainty is that William saw an opportunity presenting itself, a child alone outside, vulnerable, no witnesses around, and rain that would wash away evidence and create confusion. For a man who had been considering, planning, or perhaps attempting to work up the courage for his first murder, this presented a perfect storm of circumstances. Charlotte couldn't have been more vulnerable if William had planned it himself. Alone in the rain, locked out of the building, her security system sabotaged, no adults watching, her cries for attention drowned out by rain and the noise inside the restaurant. William approached Charlotte in that alley or whatever outdoor space she'd been locked into. We don't see the murder itself in the minigames. Five Nights at Freddy's, even at its darkest moments, tends to leave the actual violence off screen, implied rather than explicitly depicted, which somehow makes it worse because our imagination fills in details that might be more disturbing than anything that could be shown. But Charlotte's sprite fades away in the minigame, becoming dimmer and dimmer with each passing moment, until she disappears entirely from the screen. When the security puppet finally breaks free and reaches her location, Charlotte is gone. Her body lies near the trash cans behind the building, discarded like garbage, a horrific ending for a child whose defining trait was caring about others, whose selfless nature made her special. She deserves so much better than to die alone in an alley, murdered by a man her father trusted, while children who locked her out went on enjoying their party inside. The rain plays a crucial role in this tragedy beyond just setting atmosphere and creating that noir-like visual in the minigame. Rain provided cover for William's crime, muffling sounds that might have alerted people inside to Charlotte's distress. It kept people indoors, made them less likely to step outside for any reason. It created an excuse for why a child might not be immediately noticed outside. Who looks out the window during a heavy rainstorm? Rain damaged the security puppet's circuits catastrophically, ensuring that even when it broke free and followed Charlotte's bracelet signal with perfect programming execution, the animatronic was dying as it moved, sparking and failing with each step through the downpour. The water that would kill the security puppet also created conditions that would later facilitate Charlotte's possession of it, moisture somehow enabling her spirit to sink into circuits and servos, binding her soul to the machine that tried and failed to save her. The security puppet's journey to Charlotte's body represents perhaps the most heartbreaking sequence in all of Five Nights at Freddy's. This machine, programmed with single-minded purpose to protect one specific child, fights against sabotage, breaks free through mechanical force, and immediately pursues its charge into conditions it was never designed to handle. It doesn't hesitate. It doesn't calculate odds of success or consider self-preservation. It's a machine. It doesn't have self-preservation instincts. Its programming and purpose drive it forward into the rain that will destroy it. Every frame of the minigame where we control the dying security puppet, watching it spark and stutter as it moves through the rain, knowing Charlotte is already dead, knowing this desperate rescue attempt is doomed to fail, hits with devastating emotional weight. We're watching a machine fulfill its purpose with perfect dedication, while understanding that purpose can no longer be achieved. The security puppet will reach Charlotte, but it won't save her because salvation is already impossible. When the security puppet reaches Charlotte's body, it doesn't understand death. It's a machine operating on programming, not capable of comprehending mortality. It registers Charlotte's bracelet signal. It detects her physical form. Its programming tells it to protect her, to stay with her, to keep her safe. So the security puppet does the only thing it can do, the only response its programming allows for this situation. It moves to Charlotte's body and embraces it, those long mechanical arms wrapping around the small corpse in a gesture that transcends mere programming. A mechanical guardian angel arriving too late, unable to prevent the tragedy, but refusing to abandon its charge even in death. There's something profoundly human in this gesture, something that goes beyond circuits and code. Henry built this machine to protect his daughter, programmed it with directives and responses, but in this moment of failure, the security puppet's embrace feels like genuine grief, like love expressed through mechanical means. Then the security puppet systems fail completely. The rain has done too much damage. Water has penetrated too many critical circuits. The animatronic shuts down, slumped over Charlotte's body in the rain, a metal corpse embracing a human one. And in that moment of shutdown, as circuits go dark and programming ceases, as the security puppet dies next to the child it was built to protect, Charlotte's spirit finds a home. Her soul, traumatized and confused, still trying to process what just happened, still afraid and hurt and lost and betrayed, sinks into the animatronic that tried to save her. The security puppet becomes her new body. Its programming becomes the foundation for her supernatural abilities. Its purpose, protect children, becomes her purpose, but expanded, amplified, extended to all children instead of just herself. The aftermath of Charlotte's death rippled outward in ways that would define the entire Five Nights at Freddy's timeline for decades to come. Henry Emily learned his daughter was dead, murdered, while at the restaurant he'd built. Murdered despite the security system he'd specifically designed to prevent exactly this scenario. This knowledge would haunt him for the rest of his life, driving everything he did from that point forward, eventually culminating in his final plan to free all the trapped souls through fire. William Afton discovered he could murder children and get away with it, that he could kill and face no immediate consequences. This first successful murder emboldened him tremendously, leading to the missing children incident, where he'd murder at least 5 more kids, possibly more depending on which timeline and which murders we're counting. Charlotte's death proved to William that he was untouchable, that he was clever enough to avoid capture, that he could satisfy whatever dark urges drove him to kill without facing justice. The restaurant where this occurred likely closed or faced serious scrutiny, though exact details remain murky in the timeline, as FNAF timelines tend to be. There would have been investigations, police presence, media attention. A child dying at a family restaurant would create a scandal even if they couldn't prove it was murder, even if they thought it was somehow an accident or the result of negligence rather than deliberate violence. Most significantly for our story, the first possessed animatronic now existed. Charlotte Emily wasn't fully gone. She remained bound to the security puppet, which would eventually be repurposed or relocated to appear as the prize-giving puppet at the 1987 Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location. Her spirit, still possessing that protective instinct that defined her in life, would begin interacting with the world in new and unexpected ways, developing abilities and awareness beyond what any animatronic should have. She couldn't save herself. That chance had passed in that rainy alley. But as we'll see, Charlotte would dedicate her supernatural existence to saving others, to ensuring no child would face their terror alone, to giving gifts and giving life to victims just like her, to organizing resistance against William Afton's continued evil, to eventually orchestrating the happiest day that would free them all. Charlotte Emily's death wasn't just a tragedy, wasn't just one murdered child in a franchise that would feature many murdered children. It was the inciting incident for everything that followed in Five Nights at Freddy's. This is where the horror truly began, where the darkness took root. On a rainy night, when 3 bullying children, 1 child murderer, 1 sabotage security system, and 1 little girl who only wanted to protect others converged to create circumstances that would echo through decades of haunted pizzerias and possessed animatronics. Every jump scare in every game, every nightmare, every moment of terror traces back to this moment when a little girl who embodied selfless kindness was locked outside and murdered by a man who embodied cruelty, becoming something far more than human, but also far less than free. This night changed everything, set in motion events that would span decades, created the first spirit that would watch over all the others, and established the tone for what Five Nights at Freddy's would become. Not just horror, but tragedy. Not just jump scares, but genuine emotional pain that resonates across time. Possession. How Charlotte became the puppet. The transformation of Charlotte Emily from murdered child to possessed animatronic represents one of the most crucial examples of how spirits inhabit machines in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. Her possession of the security puppet established mechanics and rules that would apply to nearly every other haunted animatronic throughout the series. Understanding how Charlotte became the puppet requires examining both the specific circumstances of her death and the broader metaphysical framework Scott Cawthon created for his haunted animatronic universe. Possession in Five Nights at Freddy's isn't random or arbitrary. Spirits don't simply float around aimlessly until they happen to bump into nearby robots and slip inside. There's a process, a set of conditions that must be met for a child's soul to bind with an animatronic endoskeleton. In most cases throughout the series, we see this happening when bodies are stuffed inside animatronic suits. The physical contact between corpse and machine, particularly when remnant, that supernatural substance created through tragedy and death, becomes involved, creates a binding connection. The child's spirit becomes trapped in the metal shell that houses their body, unable to move on, unable to rest, doomed to remain until freed through specific rituals or destruction of the animatronic itself. Charlotte's possession follows a notably different pattern because her body was never stuffed inside the security puppet. William Afton left her body in the alley. He didn't hide it inside an animatronic suit, the way he would later do with the missing children. Instead, Charlotte's circumstances appear to have created what might be called a sympathetic possession, where emotional and situational resonance created the binding rather than physical containment of her corpse. Based on what we observe in the security puppet minigame and how her possession differs from other spirits throughout the franchise, we can piece together the specific factors that likely enabled Charlotte to possess the puppet. First, there's the security puppet itself and its unique purpose. This animatronic wasn't built for entertainment or profit. It was built specifically to protect Charlotte. Henry Emily designed it with his daughter's safety as the prime directive, as the single organizing principle of its existence. Every circuit, every line of code, every mechanical component existed to serve one function: keep Charlotte safe. That focused intentionality created a connection between machine and child even before her death. The security puppet was, in a very real sense, Charlotte's guardian. It monitored her location constantly through the bracelet, maintaining awareness of her at all times. It stood ready to intervene if she approached danger, programmed to prioritize her well-being above all else. It was designed to care about her well-being in whatever way a machine can be said to care about anything. When Charlotte died, that programming was in the active process of fulfilling its final command. The security puppet had broken free from sabotage. It was actively pursuing Charlotte, following her bracelet signal with mechanical determination, compelled to reach her no matter what obstacles stood in its way. The animatronic's last act before system failure was embracing Charlotte's body, trying to protect her even though protection had come too late, executing its protective programming until the very last moment of operation. This means the security puppet wasn't just any random animatronic near Charlotte's death site. It was the one machine in the entire world designed specifically for her, dying in the act of trying to save her. That created profound resonance, a connection that transcended normal mechanical function. Machine and child were linked through purpose, through that green bracelet, through the programming that said Charlotte Emily matters above all else. Second, there's the rain and the specific manner of the security puppet's death. The rain that fell that night wasn't just atmospheric, wasn't just environmental detail. It was the instrument of the security puppet's destruction. Water and electronics don't mix. This is fundamental physics. As the security puppet moved through the rain towards Charlotte, every drop that struck its circuits caused damage. Sparks flew from its joints. Systems shorted out one by one. The animatronic was literally dying as it crawled toward her body, experiencing the mechanical equivalent of death. This meant that when the security puppet reached Charlotte and embraced her, both child and machine were in states of death or dying. Charlotte's spirit was separating from her body, experiencing whatever transition occurs between life and death. The security puppet systems were failing, shutting down, ceasing operation. They existed in a liminal space together, both at the threshold between function and cessation, between existence and absence. This created what we might call sympathetic shutdown. The security puppet's programming ceased. Its purpose, protect Charlotte, could no longer be fulfilled through conventional mechanical means. But the programming didn't simply disappear or erase itself. It remained there in the circuits, dormant, but not gone. An imprint of purpose waiting for something to activate it again. When Charlotte's spirit, confused and traumatized by sudden violent death, sought something to anchor to in that moment, the evidence suggests it found the security puppet's programming. The machine's core directive, keep Charlotte safe, resonated with Charlotte's own protective instincts. Her spirit and the animatronic's purpose aligned perfectly, allowing her to slip into the role the programming had created, becoming the animatronic's new operating system, replacing mechanical instruction with conscious will. Third, there's the green bracelet and the tracking connection it represented. Charlotte wore this bracelet as a constant link to the security puppet throughout her time at the restaurant. The animatronic monitored her location through this device continuously, maintaining awareness of her at all times. Even in death, even after Charlotte's spirit left her body, that technological connection may have served as a tether, a pathway her spirit could follow. The bracelet was still on her wrist when she died, still transmitting its signal faithfully. The security puppet was still receiving that signal, still processing that data even as its other systems failed. This ongoing electronic pathway could have allowed Charlotte's ghost to follow the connection directly into the animatronic that had been linked to her throughout her life, traveling along established technological bonds to find a new home in metal and circuits. The visual transformation of the security puppet into the puppet we encounter in games reflects Charlotte's possession in subtle but significant ways. The most obvious change is the addition of purple tear streaks running down the animatronic's face from its hollow eyes to its mouth. These tears weren't part of the original design. They weren't painted there by any human hand. They appeared after Charlotte's possession, a visual manifestation of her sorrow that became permanent. The tears represent multiple layers of meaning. Most obviously, they represent Charlotte's grief over her own death, her anguish at being torn from her father and her life, her sadness at the injustice of being murdered while other children stood by and did nothing to help. The tears are eternal, painted onto the puppet's face in a way that can never be wiped away, suggesting trauma that cannot be healed through any normal means, grief that persists beyond death itself. But the purple color of the tears carries additional meaning within FNAF's visual language. Purple is consistently associated with death and William Afton throughout the series. Purple Guy, the sprite representing the killer in numerous minigames, uses this color to mark him as dangerous, wrong, corrupted. That Charlotte's tears are purple, rather than a more conventional blue or white, links her sorrow directly to Afton's actions. Her tears are purple because they were caused by purple, by the man who murdered her. The color connects victim to perpetrator, marking Charlotte's face with the evidence of what was done to her. Yet tears also symbolize empathy and emotional awareness. The puppet stands apart from other animatronics precisely because Charlotte maintained her humanity, her ability to feel for others, to recognize their pain and respond with compassion. The tears mark her as the one animatronic who genuinely cries, who possesses emotional depth beyond rage and confusion. When we see those purple streaks, we're reminded that underneath the mechanical exterior is a child who still feels, still grieves, still cares about others despite everything she's endured. The puppet's eye behavior also changed dramatically after possession. The security puppet had glowing green eyes matching Charlotte's bracelet. The possessed puppet's eyes are usually hollow black voids, empty spaces that somehow feel like they're looking at you despite containing nothing. But occasionally, small white pupils appear in those voids, especially during jump scares or moments of intense activity. This suggests Charlotte's consciousness looking out through the animatronic's face, seeing the world through those hollow eye sockets, focusing her attention on something or someone. The puppet's movement patterns differ from other animatronics in ways that clearly reflect Charlotte's influence and her supernatural nature. While possessed characters like Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy stumble and move erratically, constrained by their animatronic forms and behaving more like animals than people. The puppet moves with intention and grace that seems impossible given its mechanical structure. It glides more than walks, seems to float sometimes. It can extend its limbs beyond what should be mechanically possible. It appears to phase through certain barriers and ignore standard physical limitations. This suggests Charlotte has learned to use her spectral nature to enhance the puppet's capabilities beyond its original design specifications. She's not just puppeteering the machine, controlling it like someone pulling strings. She's transcended its mechanical limits through force of will, through the supernatural advantages possession grants. The puppet moves the way Charlotte wants it to move, unconstrained by what the machine should be able to do. Perhaps most importantly, Charlotte's personality survived the possession intact. The puppet isn't mindless or animalistic like some possessed animatronics. It demonstrates planning, strategy, and most crucially, that same protective instinct that defines Charlotte in life. The security puppet was programmed to protect Charlotte. The possessed puppet extends that protection to all children, particularly those who've been murdered like Charlotte herself was. This isn't random programming glitching or malfunction. This is Charlotte Emily making conscious choices to use her cursed state to help others, to ensure no child suffers alone the way she did. Her selfless nature, that defining characteristic Henry spoke of, didn't die with her body. It intensified, became her entire reason for existing, the purpose that sustains her through decades of imprisonment in an animatronic shell. Charlotte's ongoing possession differs somewhat from other possessed animatronics because she wasn't stuffed inside the suit. When William Afton killed the missing children and stuffed their bodies inside Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, those spirits became trapped by physical remains intermingled with machinery. Their bodies rotted inside the suits, becoming part of the animatronics themselves, creating a tight binding that was extremely difficult to break. Charlotte's possession relies more on spiritual resonance and willing inhabitation. Her body was found and presumably buried, given proper funeral rites. She chose to remain in the puppet, or perhaps couldn't leave due to the traumatic circumstances of her death and the security puppet's role in those final moments. This different type of possession might explain why Charlotte seems more aware and capable than other spirits. She's not trapped by physical remains. She's not confused by the dissolution of her body inside an animatronic shell. She's possessing the puppet the way a ghost might possess any vessel, maintaining more autonomy and self-awareness because the binding is spiritual rather than physical. This allows her to interact with other spirits in ways they cannot, to help them possess animatronics themselves, to organize them toward common goals, to eventually guide them toward peace. Charlotte's unique possession makes her uniquely positioned to serve as guardian and guide for all the other lost souls. The first possession established a template and created a guardian who would be ready when William Afton struck again. When he committed the missing children incident, when he filled Freddy's pizzeria with more dead kids and more vengeful spirits, Charlotte was there, experienced in possession, understanding from the inside what these trapped children needed and felt. She learned how possession worked by experiencing it herself. She understood the confusion, the rage, the desperate need for purpose that comes with being bound to an animatronic body. Charlotte Emily's possession of the security puppet transformed her from victim to guardian, from murdered child to supernatural protector. In that rain-soaked alley, as her spirit merged with the machine designed to protect her, Charlotte Emily the human ended and the puppet began. But Charlotte's essence, her personality, her protective instincts, all of that came along for the transformation, ensuring that the puppet isn't just a possessed animatronic, but Charlotte Emily refusing to let death stop her from protecting children who need help. That refusal would shape everything that followed in the 5 Nights at Freddy's timeline.